Alright, so DeMarco. Not really been a big fan of this guy in the past, although I do think his last album was by far his best. And actually really impressive in terms of songwriting and lyrical themes across that one. I've certainly liked songs here and there from his previous work, but generally I find him to be pretty banal, honestly. He's not really the most interesting singer or musician, I don't think. Honestly, if it weren't for music publications endorsing him early on, I don't think we'd even be having this conversation right now, because I would assume he would just be a nobody. Speaking of which, he garnered a bit of controversy with the lead single being named Nobody and the album being titled Here Comes the Cowboy, and Mitski fans and music fans in general found it very suspect, and people weren't really into the idea of this being named Here Comes the Cowboy and having the lead single called Nobody very soon after that album came out. Honestly, it seemed like another case of today's internet age where people do anything they possibly can to stir up as much controversy, whether it be warranted or not. Just any amount of controversy gives you enough attention to boost the hype for your album, or even in the film industry this is something that happens, or even, you know, like just as simply YouTubers do this. It's just something like that to me that I tried to ignore and didn't really hold DeMarco accountable for this atrocity. But as for the music on here, my god, this is unbelievably dull. The first track leading into this album, I didn't really get anything from. Like, I couldn't believe how the same line was repeated the whole way through Here Comes the Cowboy, and it was sort of like it was setting something up, or it was like building up to something, but like nothing ever came. Sure, the track that it does lead into, Nobody, is fine enough. Some simple basic guitar playing on this track. It's as basic as it can possibly be, honestly. Some simple chord structures throughout, very little in the way of any extra instrumentation. Mac just singing in his usual way that doesn't really grip me enough. And sadly, which was something that made his last album his best album, still not a great album, but at least I was interested in what he was singing about throughout. He had some really interesting themes about his father, and I just found it quite compelling, honestly, even if the music could have been a little bit better. But here, there's like none of that here. Like, all of that interesting songwriting's just been stripped away. And sure, it's totally fine to sometimes be subjected to music that is pretty simple. You don't always need the most intricate guitar playing. You don't even need the most intricate music in general. But if you've got nothing from a lyrical standpoint to grasp onto either, then it just makes everything so much worse. Like with that Big Thief album that I reviewed recently. Musically, it was actually quite nice, but it wasn't the most experimental you'll ever come across, for sure. But thankfully, Adrian as a singer, you know, was writing some really interesting songs and making me kind of dig deeper into what she was talking about. But on this album, what's Mac offering? What's he offering here? Little Dogs March. I cannot imagine a day in my life where I'd ever hear this song and think to myself, you know what? This is some good shit. Choo Choo is hands down one of the worst songs I've heard all year, and I'm not even exaggerating when I say that here, because I don't usually do a worst songs of the year list, but man, this would absolutely be up there in contention for being like a top 10 worst I've heard since January this year. This track is just abysmal. It's playful and it's silly, yeah, but it's the same thing the whole way through. He doesn't switch it up, he doesn't add anything, it's just choo choo. I suppose it plays into the theme of the cowboy's on his way, here he comes. Do you get it? Similarly with Baby Bye Bye, the closing track, where it's just the same idea being played on throughout the whole song. He does this a lot on this album, where he'll just stick to one lyric or repeat the same thing throughout the song. It just gets very tedious and boring, and again, because these tracks don't change up at any point, or there's nothing really going on musically that interests my ears at all, it just makes it even worse to find out that Mac isn't adding anything to these songs either. He could just at least add a bit of energy with his vocals, please. Just something, but it's the same. The same the whole way through, that same vocal tone, the monotonous delivery. It is incredibly mundane. I don't know about you guys, but I like my singers to have at least some kind of personality to their voice. Like, deliver it with some kind of emotion or passion. But there is just this trend in indie music, and music publications and music critics typically like hype this kind of thing up, where the singers are just so lazy and hazy and they don't add anything to their voice. It's just so dull. And Mac was one of the early ones as well. He was back there in 2012, part of this 2010s indie trend of lifeless singers that get praise like crazy. Yeah, there's not much else to say. I think I've said as much as I can about this album, because so many tracks run into each other. They sound identical from a musical standpoint, that it's very difficult to pick apart them in any way at all. So I'm gonna go 4 out of 10. I thought this was pretty bad. Let me know your thoughts on this if you like it way more than I did. Hope you did, and thank you for watching my review. Thank you. Have a good day. Goodbye.